Now we invite Sir Mark Tully to tell us about his new book, Upcountry Tales. Sir Mark Tully, please. Jairam Ramesh couldn't be here with us today.
Well, the mic's on. I have to disappoint you, unfortunately, because you are all expecting me to do very little talking and listen to Jairam talk about P.N. Huxter, who, having read Jairam's book, I'm more than ever convinced was probably one of the most important people who lived in India for many years, particularly during the heyday of Indira Gandhi. So I'm really sorry about that. And I have to tell you also that from talking about a very important person, significant role in history, I'm going to talk to you about a lot of people who deliberately I have made unimportant in the short stories I've written. And the short stories that's the book, and they're called Upcountry Tales. Many people in the past have said to me, one of your troubles is that you have gone native. This upcountry phrase is really a phrase from the British Raj. I don't know how many of you now actually have ever heard of the phrase, but what it means really is the Dehat, remote part of the country, a country far removed from the citizens of the big cities of India. And the stories which I tell here are fictional, but some of them are based on facts. I chose fiction after writing quite a lot of books which were basically factual, because, you know, as a reporter, always, anyhow, one is telling a story. But there comes a time sometimes when you feel, well, there's more behind this story than I can get in the facts. You are, in a sense, constrained by the facts. So once before, 20 years ago, I wrote a book of short stories, and then I had another go at it. And I've want to first of all say that these short stories are all about Eastern Uttar Pradesh. And Eastern Uttar Pradesh is a part of the country I rather very fond of. And there's a strange thing about it for me, is that I feel that incredible sensation that I'm sure many of you also feel from time to time. I feel I've been here before. And perhaps I invent this sensation, but I doesn't feel like that. But I have in a way been there before, because my great-great-grandfather was an opium agent in Eastern UP. My great-grandfather was a trader in Eastern UP. My grandfather was born on the UP-Bihar border, and he became an indigo planter in Eastern UP. So I do have links with Eastern UP, and I think it's a very beautiful part of the country. It's a part of the country that many of you would have never gone to, I suspect. The Ganges there is very beautiful, and there's still much more of the old days about the place. That atmosphere is different. Marked contrast, for instance, to Western UP. It's said to be full of gundas and gangsters and mafia and that sort of thing. But it's also got, of course, very simple, ordinary people living. And I wanted in these books to tell stories about unimportant people and distinctly not people who live in cities and not what you would classify as the Indian middle class. Because I do think there is a great deal of writing about the angsts of the middle class, but not nearly as much writing, and I think not nearly enough writing about rural India and about the people of rural India. And the other thing which runs through these stories in a way is my particular bête noire, should I say that? I don't know, really. I don't know. Maybe I should. But my particular concern about this country, which I have spoken about time and time again and written about, not that my speaking about it is likely to do any good, but there we are. And that is what I believe is the very low standard of governance in this country, particularly in the rural areas, and the appalling, and I use that word very deliberately, the appalling way that the lower orders of the bureaucracy treat the public that they have to deal with, and the public has to deal with them. I'm always reminded when I talk about this of a villager who said to me that in his village only the rich people got BPL cards, below poverty level cards, and those who needed them didn't get them. And so I said to him, why don't you go to the block development officer and ask him where your BPL card is or how you can get a BPL card? And he said, I don't go to see मैं वहाँ पर नहीं जाता हूँ क्योंकि वीडियो क्या बोलेंगे वो सिर्फ बोलेंगे bago साले. And this is actually the real truth of the matter when you see it. The petty corruption, the oppression, the dishonesty of the bureaucracy in the rural areas is something which is really distressing when you come across it. And I do believe that good governance is the great, or improved governance, is the one thing which would really make a huge difference in India. And if I could just add one thing here, that is that I don't believe that digitalizing things will solve the problems of bad governance in the rural areas. Because it's like people who thought that when the liberalization of the economy came about, people thought, oh, yes, now everything is wonderful, that solved all our problems. But bad governance has continued to plague the country. In the same way now, even now, with digitalization and everything else, bad governance is still a major problem. And if you read a book, the latest book by John Drees, you will get a much greater flavor of that than you will get from my book. Because John Drees, for instance, in one of the articles in his books, he criticizes the compulsory use of the Aadhaar card. And he tells the stories of how people go to Aadhaar, go to get their rations or something like that. and they don't, the Aadhaar card doesn't work or something goes wrong, and so they don't get their rations. And I personally had an interesting experience of this, because when I went to get my Aadhaar card in a small travel agents in the back of Nizamuddin, I kept on putting my hand on the machine, which was meant to take a photograph of it, and nothing happened, nothing happened, nothing happened. Eventually, after about 15 minutes, the guy who was trying to do this for me got hold of my hand and rubbed it through my hair like this. And this eventually had a magical impact. However, when a few days later I went to buy another mobile and I was told I had to have an Aadhaar card, the new Aadhaar card didn't work. And I just put this to you. Imagine you are an old lady, you go to a normal, corrupt, rough and rude ration shop proprietor, and he says, "Where's your Aadhaar card?" And he put your hand on this machine. She puts his hand on the machine, nothing happens. So what? Do you think he's going to spend 16 minutes or more and finally rub his hand through her hair? No, like the BDO, he'll just say, "Aapke Aadhaar card nakli hai, bargo." So this problem really, I do believe, is at the heart of so many problems of India. Well, back to my book, and I mustn't rabbit on too long. I can't remember how long I've got, actually. Rahul, will you tell me when to shut up, or how will we do it?
No, carry on.
Oh, okay.
But I want to say a few words about you when you finish.
Oh, don't say that. Yes, now let me come to these stories. As I said, they are ordinary stories about ordinary people. There's a Dalit who tries to build a temple. There's another Dalit, a fascinating Dalit who was my chowkidar, actually, and we used to have discussions at night as he was sitting on the veranda when he was the BBC chowkidar about religion. And he would say to me that he was not Bhagwan Bharosa, he did not believe in God. And he would always argue with me that you believe in God, that's okay, because God has looked after you pretty well. But look at me, how can I believe in God in the wretched state in which I am? So we had these discussions. Time went by, he left. He went back to his village, as I thought. But I said to him, Ram Kinavan, you must keep in touch with me. And he did, faithfully, and he still is in touch with me. One day, after some 2 or 3 years or more, he rings me up and he says, Ram Kinavan, and I say, Aap kahan hai? And he says, "Main mandir mein ho." I say, "Mandir mein hai? Ye kaisa ho gaya?" Or anything like that, who didn't believe in God or religion at all, had, after a tragedy had struck him, had become a Buddhist. And furthermore, he was not just a Buddhist, he was a Buddhist monk. And his story, fictionalized somewhat, is one of the stories in this book. And he's a truly remarkable and truly wonderful man, and I'm proud that he's still in touch with me. Then other stories, just let me tell you a few of them. There's one which illustrates the politicking which goes on in police cases, a murder case where the police are persuaded for political reasons, some of the police, to charge a totally innocent man, and how that goes wrong for the police officers in the end. There's a political story about a young hopeful who hopes to inherit his father's constituency, but when he goes there, he's a wholly incompetent politician, a wholly incompetent speaker, and he makes a mess of it. And then in the middle of, just as he's coming to the end, really, and really feeling things have gone too bad, he comes across a veteran politician who is modelled on my old friend who I dearly loved, Chaudhry Devi Lal. And Chaudhry Devi Lal, first of all, gives him a huge, what I can only call bollocking, for daring to come into his area and try and establish himself. And then he says to him, but if you join my party, I will make sure you get elected. Forget the Congress, forget your father's legacy, join my party, join me. But the poor guy, unfortunately, is so overawed and terrified by Chaudhry Saab that he decides it's better to drop the idea of politics altogether. So that's another of the stories of students who are in love with each other, but one wants to go back to his village to work, and one wants to join the IAS, and they agree that they can't, the two lives will not go together, so they can't live together. So those are some of the stories. Now, I will now, if I have the time, I'd like to read, first of all, two bits from the introduction, which will, I hope, entertain you, but will also give you a flavor of how, during a journalist, I have had real-life entertaining stories, and then I will just read to you the end of one of the stories in this book, which is perhaps my favorite story. But the first one is about Devi Lal. This story is about the day in 1990 when the alliance, which included the Janata Party, won the election, and there was a competition, really, between Devi Lal and VP Singh as to who should be Prime Minister. And eventually, Devi Lal said, all right, to VP Singh, all right, you become Prime Minister. So on that day, Devi Lal telephoned me to ask whether I thought he had made the right decision. I told him I thought he had been statesmanlike by making a sacrifice, and that voters would appreciate the sacrifice because it showed he was not kursi ke lalachi, greedy for the seat. He grunted and asked me to put my colleague Satish Jacob on the phone, and said to him, Mark Tully tells me I've done the right thing. I think I'm a bloody fool. And the second one is about my experiences in another country, Pakistan. And this one is about the days of General Zia-ul-Haq, who I didn't get on very well with. It certainly was no friend of mine. And after General Zia-ul-Haq mounted his coup ousting Bhutto, I had a strange relationship with his spokesman, Colonel Salik. I had known Salik when I was covering the army crackdown in the then East Pakistan. He appeared severe, humorless, and impersonal. But when he became Zia's spokesman, I discovered he did have a sense of humor. And although he saw me as an adversary, a warmth developed between us. Once I went to his office one floor above Zia's for a briefing. And incidentally, entertainingly, Zia's office was in the house which belonged to the proprietors of the Murray Brewery. And as you know, Zia was a fanatical prohibitionist. Anyhow, there I was in this office. Once I went to his office, one floor above Ziert's, for a briefing. After it was over, I rose to leave, saying I had a lunch engagement. Salek insisted I couldn't leave, but wouldn't explain why. Eventually, he said, "You can go now." When I asked why he had held me back, he laughed. "It was prayer time," he said, "and you would have had to pass the president prostrating himself as he said his prayers in the corridor. Knowing what you think of him, I was afraid you would kick him up the arse." So those are two parts from the introduction of the book, trying to establish myself as a bona fide journalist. Now, one of the chapters in the book is about one of my most, how should I say, loved institutions in this country, or would it be better to say loved and hated from time to time, which is Indian Railways. And if I can incidentally put in a plea for the railways, I think it is appalling the amount of effort going in to spread aviation in this country, which in my view is the most hideously boring, unattractive, ghastly form of transport, and can never be sufficient to carry the huge number of people in this country, around the country, and the state of the railways. I think it's really shocking. Your railways are a great, great heritage. They're a wonderful railway system, loved by railway lovers around the world. And we don't take proper care of them. So I had to have a railway story. And the railway story is in some way based slightly on a famous British comedy called The Titchfield Thunderbolt, which was a story about the closing of a branch line. So I invented the branch line, which was going to be closed, and I invented a story around it, located somewhere in eastern UP. And there was competition between the people who wanted to preserve the branch line and the proprietors of the bus company, which was very happy about it being closed down. And the bus company was owned by a member of parliament. And the member of parliament was not a very pleasant man, and he is particularly notorious for being very mean. So what happens very quickly is that there's this great debate and row going on, and eventually someone suggests that they go to a highly respected sadhu and ask him how they can reach a decision on this. And the sadhu says, well, let God decide. Why don't you have a race between the bus and the train? Now, the train is rather slow and rather decrepit, but fortunately the road isn't very good either. So eventually they set off on this race. And there were various accidents happen on the way. Even before the race, the bus people have hartals, which they try to block the progress of the train, and they do many other things like this. They stop having the hartals when the engine driver eventually says, well, to hell with you lot, and proceeds slowly but steadily towards the people sitting on the track, who disappear pretty quickly and don't try that trick again. But anyhow, these things happen. People are, attempts are made on both sides to hinder the bus and the train service. And then eventually the race does take place. And this is what happens at the end. And the end for me as well. It said, the trains are coming towards the mainline station. The train and the bus are coming towards the mainline station, which is the place where the race is to end. And what happens there is then, with less than a kilometre to go, as the road curved towards Faridpur station, the bus engine choked. The bus jerked and almost stopped. The driver slammed his foot on the accelerator viciously. The bus jerked forward again, only come to a full stop. The self-starter made no impact on the engine, which was stone dead. Driver Charanjit Yadav struggled with the ignition for a few seconds, and then, to the surprise of all the passengers, he was suddenly overcome by uncontrollable laughter. "Oh ho ho ho," he spluttered. "The bastard has finally got his just desserts." Barely able to get his words out between the gales of laughter shaking him, he went on, This is so wonderful, wonderful. The cheat has been beaten at its own game." "What on earth are you talking about?" the passengers asked. He explained, still spluttering with laughter, and a very rude word, has been cheated. Who's been cheated? The manager, the owner of this third-rate bus. I know he ordered more than enough diesel for the race. He showed me the receipt when he was giving me instructions, warning me he didn't want any hera-feri, like siphoning diesel out of the tank. But his own man has cheated me. It's obvious. It's the old trick. Get a false receipt, put in less diesel than the bill shows, and share the proceeds with the petrol pump wallah. And as a result of the bus running out of petrol, what happened in Akbar, the engine chugged in, coming closer and closer, and won the race. Now the bell's ringing. I'll be ordered out. Thank you so much for listening so patiently. And if one or two of you buy the book, my publisher will be delighted. So will I. Thank you all very much.
I thought I would just add a few words about Mark. Actually, he's Sir Mark Tully because he was knighted by the British. I don't think there's any correspondent who has written and broadcast so fairly and accurately about India and the country. I'll just mention one anecdote to tell you how famous a man. This is going back to the 1980s, 84 or 85 or so. I was then the editor of the Indian Express in Chandigarh, and I was told about how there was a cabinet, very important cabinet meeting taking place. Surjit Singh Barnala was then the chief minister. And Surjit Singh Barnala, at a very crucial time of the cabinet meeting, he stopped the cabinet meeting. He said, "Sorry, I have to go, and this cabinet meeting will take place a little later. I have given Mark Tully an appointment, and I must go and meet Mark Tully." So the cabinet meeting ended because Mark was waiting to interview Surjit Singh Barnala. So that's the kind of formidable reputation this man had. I might also add that one of his predecessors was a man called Sir Charles Wheeler, whom Mark must have known about. And his daughter happens to be here with us, somewhere in the audience, I think. Marina Wheeler. I don't know whether she's here at the moment, but she was here in the morning. So I just thought I would mention that two of the most famous correspondents, BBC correspondents, one whose daughter is here, and Sir Mark Tully, who's here with us also. Thank you, Mark.